Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. When's the last time you sat down with your team and took them through your plans for the future? A real session around the goals and strategy of the business could provide focus and make all the difference to performance. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Perhaps things are going well and you feel the business as usual approach is okay. Or maybe you don't have the time or resources to realign your current strategy. But technology's rapidly changing, people's buying habits are shifting, and as we've all experienced with COVID, the unexpected can rudely interrupt the way we do things. Executive coach and co-founder of Courageous Leaders, Mandy Holloway, says a strategy is crucial for business success. And she has 5 reasons why that is. Mandy's talking to Chris Ashmore.
The first one is to align the efforts and the energy of all the people in the business. Secondly is clarity of purpose and direction. So we have everybody knowing where the business is going and what our purpose is. Also engaged and empowered to achieve the goals. Therefore, that leads to accountability for performance that can be created, and it actually gives people permission to say no. That's not aligned with the strategy, that's not a task I'm going to complete, which I think is really powerful.
Well, having a strategy, of course, is important, but if it's not implemented, then it all comes to naught, I suppose. And you say there's a big difference between the production of a strategy and the activation of a strategy. What do you mean?
Yeah, I think what I see is a lot of energy, passion, dreaming big, all those sorts of brave kinds of things that we do when we're actually producing our strategy. And we put it in a document, we put it on a page, we even create cartoons, we create visual imagery around it. And it's all very exciting. It often is just a limited few that end up doing that. There's not a lot of organizations that come from the bottom up. It's normally done near the top. So a lot of dreaming goes into it, and it's really courageous and brave and all that kind of stuff. Then we've got to activate it. And that takes a lot of bravery to actually implement a strategy. And I remember as a partner in one of the big 4 accounting firms, we'd come up with this strategy for management consulting. And just a simple thing was, look, we're not going to play with the small fish anymore. We need to go after the big stuff, And we'd have this big strategy and we'd talk about it and everything. And honestly, I would sit there and we're coming close to the end of the quarter, and all of a sudden people are running after all these small fish. And I'm like, what's everyone doing? And it's like, well, I don't want to be the one that doesn't meet my target for revenue. So this operational emphasis on short-term results is a huge tension for strategy, because strategy is the long game and operational performance is the short game.
Well, when it comes to strategy activation, Mandy, where do leaders fail?
Yeah, that's and I think one of the things is distraction. So they allow themselves to be very easily distracted. The other reason that we fail is we use complicated language, complicated concepts that are really not very easy to understand lower down in the organization. Another reason and place that they fail that I talk about a lot is that for a strategy to work from an organization, we really do need to have a first team mindset. And that comes from the work of Patrick Lencioni, and I've done this with many leadership teams. I'll put all the senior execs together and I'll say, okay, so, where are we at from a high performing space? Where do you think the team's sitting? One of their first questions, I'll go, well, what team do you mean, Mandy? Because they're walking in as the head of HR, the head of finance, head of operations. And I'll go, okay, well, let's look at it both ways. Let's have a look at where do you think your leadership team is, the people in this room right now, and where do you think your functional team is at? My next question then is, who's your first team? And 90% of the time, people will say their functional team is their first team. So what they're doing is they're going in with the mindset to maximize what they can get out from a performance perspective for finance or for sales or for IT. They're not thinking strategically across the organisation as a whole. And that is a big place where things fall down. And particularly when we find ourselves that we're behind budget, we're under pressure, we're going to look at what's good for our team as opposed to necessarily what might be good for the organisation. And as someone said to me today, particularly when bonuses are at play as well.
Well, that comes down to accountability, I suppose. How do you keep people accountable to ensure they stay on track?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is getting the first team together, ensuring that the first team are bringing that mindset and bringing accountability to the strategy as a whole and not just their functional space. They create an operating rhythm where they get together every month and they talk about how they're staying true and creating that accountability to the strategy in each of their functional areas so that we don't have that silo mentality. But then as we go down, and so there's a people leader that I was talking to recently, and it was great to hear her talking about how she brings her team together, her functional team together every week. And they thought this was overkill, but she brings them together every week to talk about how what they're doing on a daily basis relates to the strategy, and has given them permission to say no to things that don't align with the strategy. And I said to her, that's a really important thing to do for people, is give them permission. Because often people don't want to say no. They want to be a people pleaser. You know, they don't want to be seen as that difficult person that says no to things. So they're constantly saying yes. There's a great quote from James Clear: without hard work, a great strategy remains a dream. Without a great strategy, hard work becomes a nightmare. And I think a lot of people are living in a nightmare at the moment. They're working so hard, but that's also because they're not saying no to things and not sticking to a strategy. And so the accountability means that the leaders have to create that discipline to hold people to account, but also very importantly, give them permission to say no.
Well, what approach do you take? What strategy activation approach do you recommend?
Deciding on what your strategy is, then really taking a step back and going, well, what are the behaviours that we're going to need? What are the behaviours that are going to enable us to actually activate that strategy? So, you know, trust might be a really important one. Having hard conversations, able to say no and not judge people. So you'd come up with a list of things. And as the strategy is being activated in that operating rhythm on a month-by-month basis.
So what's an example of one of those tiny little behaviours?
As an example, if I'm looking at trust, one of the things that is known from a lot of research is that what we know is that humans will always think that other people are self-oriented, and we will want to protect ourselves. So we know the neural pathways in the brain. We have one that relates to reward for every 5 that relate to threat. So we're always going to see the worst in people. Unfortunately, that's what we're hardwired to do. So what I say to people with trust is just start by sharing your intent. What's your intent for sending the email? What's your intent for having the conversation? And that is a really tiny little habit that has a huge impact on how we start to break down the judgment and what does that person really mean by this email? You know, you'll receive something and you'll always second guess why they're sending it to you or why they're having the conversation with you. So be really clear. This is my intent. This is my purpose. And that starts to break down the distrust in an organisation.
That was Courageous Leaders co-founder Mandy Holloway. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.